we're diving deep today into something I bet is already on your mind. You know those horrific wildfires tearing through Southern California? We're all seeing the images, the headlines, the whole thing. But I figure you want more than just the surface, right? Like you want to really get how complex this all is. And that's why we're here. We'll be covering multiple fires, the impact on people, obviously, but the environment too, the stuff firefighters are up against, and even some unsettling side effects that pop up, like looting. Oh, and get this, almost 1,000 prisoners are helping fight these fires. I mean, what? That's a whole other conversation right there.
It's a lot to unpack, for sure.
Yeah.
It's easy to just get stuck on the immediate chaos, but to really get it, we got to break it down.
Okay, so first things first, the fires themselves. I keep hearing Palisades fire, Eaton fire. Are those like the main players here?
Those are two of the big ones, yeah, along with the Hearst fire. And I know you've probably heard historic thrown around, but honestly, this time it's not an exaggeration. We're talking some of the most destructive fires in California history already.
Wow. Okay, that sets the stage. And I know there have been fatalities, but the numbers keep changing, it seems like. What's the latest on that?
Sadly, the confirmed death toll is at 24 right now. But, and this is important, there are still search and rescue teams out looking for missing people. It's a grim reminder that this isn't just about property damage. We're talking about lives, lost families left wondering.
It's just heartbreaking. And I've heard the wind is a huge reason these fires are so tough to contain.
Absolutely. We're talking practically hurricane-force winds here, up to 70 miles per hour. These winds pick up burning embers, toss them miles ahead of the fire line. It's a nightmare for firefighters trying to get ahead of that.
So even if they get one area under control, the wind can just reignite things somewhere else. It feels like an impossible battle.
It's incredibly challenging, and it's unfortunately becoming more common as climate change does its thing. Higher temperatures, longer droughts, even the way the vegetation is changing. It's like the environment is becoming, a tinderbox, just waiting for a spark.
You mentioned earlier that that prisoners are involved in fighting these fires. I have to admit, my first thought was, wait, seriously? Seems incredibly risky.
It is risky, and it's a complicated issue. No doubt California's had this program for decades, where incarcerated individuals can volunteer for firefighting crews. There are currently almost 1,000 of them on the front lines right now.
1,000. Wow. So about this program, what are the arguments for it and against it? I mean, it's got to be controversial.
For sure. Well, proponents say it gives these individuals a chance to learn valuable skills, gain a sense of purpose, that sort of thing. It's a way to contribute to society, maybe even helps with rehabilitation. Plus, and let's be real, it's significantly cheaper for the state compared to, hiring and training full-time firefighters.
Yeah, there's the cost-saving angle, but is it, I don't know, exploitative? These are people putting their lives on the line?
That's the heart of the ethical debate. Critics point out that these incarcerated firefighters make less than $2 an hour for incredibly dangerous work. Some argue it's coercive, given their limited choices.
Yeah, I can see that. And what happens if they get injured? Do they get the same care as a professional firefighter?
That's where it gets murky, legally and ethically. It's a whole other deep dive, honestly.
Yeah.
But at least we can acknowledge their bravery in this situation.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've got these massive wind-fueled fires and this whole complex situation with the incarcerated firefighters. What else factors into this crisis, do you think?
Well, unfortunately, when disaster hits, it brings out the worst in some people. There are reports of looting in evacuated areas, which is, just disheartening.
Awful. Is that pure opportunism, or is there more to it when there's this level of chaos?
I'd say it's a mix. Some people are desperate, having lost everything. They feel they have no other options. But for others, it's the breakdown of social order. The chance arises and they take it. Law enforcement stretched thin. Communities are disrupted. It's a breeding ground for crime.
It's like the rules of society are suspended, and it gets really dangerous. And it doesn't help that there are reports of potential arson, too, literally adding fuel to the fire.
Right. Several incidents are being investigated, and it just highlights the complexity here. We're not just battling the flames. It's the human element, too, just as unpredictable.
Have they had to, call in the National Guard in some areas? I feel like I saw that somewhere.
Yeah, the National Guard is there, providing support to law enforcement, helping with evacuations, aid distribution, all that. Their presence shows this isn't just a local fire department thing. It's a full-blown crisis.
Yeah, the scale of this is just massive. But even if people escape the flames, they've still lost their homes. And with the housing crisis in California, that's a whole other layer of problems.
Exactly. Thousands of people displaced, suddenly needing housing demand goes up. And it creates the perfect conditions for, well, for price gouging.
Price gouging. Sorry, break that down for me.
Picture this. You fled a wildfire, lost everything, you're desperate for any place to live. Landlords and rental companies see this, and they jack up prices, taking advantage.
So someone paying, say, $2,500 a month for an apartment might suddenly be facing $5,000 just because of the fires. That's messed up.
It is, and often it's illegal. California has strict laws against this during emergencies. But it doesn't stop everyone. People feel trapped, having to pay whatever it takes.
Awful situation. You're dealing with the trauma of the fire and then this financial hate. What can people even do if they encounter that?
Well, the good news is California takes this very seriously. There's a hotline specifically for reporting price gouging, run by the state attorney general. They're investigating these cases. Landlords caught doing this face big fines, even jail time.
Good. There should be consequences for that. But it shows, again, there's this long-term fallout from the fires that's just as bad, in a way.
Exactly. And speaking of long-term consequences, there's something else that spreads even faster than fire. Misinformation.
Oh, yeah. The fake news and rumors can't be good in a situation like this.
Huge problem.
Hmm.
False info leads to panic, confusion. It can even mess up rescue efforts. Imagine people making decisions based on a rumor about a road closure or an evacuation order. It could be life or death.
No kidding. And I bet with the incarcerated firefighters, there's a lot of misinformation flying around about them, too.
You're right. We talked about the ethics of the program itself. Now add in the wildfire rumor mill. Someone might see prisoners fighting fires and assume they started them to get released early.
Oof, yeah. That's just nasty. And it shows how fast things can get twisted online. But in this kind of chaos, how do you even know what to trust?
Got to be discerning about your sources, especially online. Stick to reliable news, double-check anything that seems iffy, and remember, everyone has their biases.
Good advice in general, really. Hearing all this about the fires, the crime, the misinformation, it gets heavy. Any positive stories coming out of this? I need some good news, honestly.
Of course, even in this devastation, there are these incredible stories of, like, human resilience, people helping each other, communities coming together, showing that even in dark times, there's hope.
I love to hear that. Can you give me some specifics? I need a dose of optimism right now.
Well, there was this thing in Malibu. A neighborhood organized a huge cookout for everyone who'd evacuated. Hot meals, place to rest, some company for people who'd lost it all. And up in Pacific Palisades, volunteers are working nonstop, distributing supplies, offering rides, just being there for people.
It's amazing to see people step up like that. Putting their own worries aside really restores your faith in humanity.
It really does. And it's not just anecdotes. There's research on disaster resilience that shows how crucial social support is in these times. People who feel connected to their community, they cope better, they recover faster from this kind of trauma.
So it's not just rebuilding homes and stuff, it's rebuilding that sense of community. I think that's a good place to pause for now. Covered a lot already, but there's still more to explore.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface, but we've got a good foundation to understand all these challenges and opportunities these wildfires have unleashed. Yeah, it really shows you, even with tragedy, people step up. It's pretty amazing. But there's this whole other side that we haven't even gotten to the environmental impact, I mean.
Right. We talked about people losing homes and everything, but what about, like, the whole ecosystem, the forests, the wildlife, even the air we breathe? It's got to be connected.
You got it. These fires, they aren't just burning trees. We're talking tons of carbon dioxide released into the atmosphere, which, as you know, just makes climate change worse. Then there's the soil erosion, water contamination, habitats destroyed for who knows how many animals. It's a lot.
It's like one disaster feeds another, right? And how long does it even take for those ecosystems to, like, bounce back?
We're talking years, maybe decades, for some areas to fully recover. And it's not just the environment itself. Think about the people who depend on it for their jobs, their lives, tourism, agriculture, even logging. The economic impact is huge.
You realize how connected it all is. We can't just focus on the right now. It's the ripple effects, you know? This is making me think back to something you said earlier about the incarcerated firefighters. Could their involvement in all this actually be, like, feeding the misinformation about them?
That's an interesting thought. You've got a group of people very visible, involved in something controversial. Misinformation can take hold easily, especially online these days.
Yeah, especially online. Things spread so fast without context. I bet there were people who see prisoners fighting fires and just assume all kinds of stuff without understanding the program at all.
Absolutely. And we got to remember, these individuals, they aren't all the same. They've got their own stories, reasons for being there. Reducing them to a stereotype just feeds the misinformation.
So how do we combat that? How do we get people to, like, think critically, get the full story?
Starts with being self-aware, honestly. We all have biases. Recognizing them is step one in understanding how they might be shaping what we see, what we believe.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught in those echo chambers online, just surrounded by stuff that agrees with you.
Exactly, which is why it's so important to find different viewpoints. Read news from various sources, listen to podcasts that challenge your thinking, talk to people who disagree with you. It's uncomfortable sometimes, but that's how we learn.
I like that, embracing the discomfort. This whole wildfire thing, it's anything but simple. We've got the crisis now, the long-term effects, ethical questions, a lot to process.
It is. And that's why these conversations matter. We got to go deeper than the headlines, look at the nuances, really think about it all.
Definitely. And it's not just about solutions, right? It's about the people, the human stories in the middle of this. We've talked numbers and systems, but behind each one, there's someone whose life's been turned upside down.
You're so right. Actually, we have a source here that tells the story of a family who lost their home in the Palisades fire. Really brings it home, the personal impact.
Okay, tell me about them. What was their experience like?
So the dad, John, he's a firefighter himself. He was out fighting a different fire when the Palisades one started near his own house. Can you imagine?
Oh, wow. Facing that danger on two fronts, that's just, I can't even imagine.
It's tough. His wife, Sarah, and their 2 kids had to evacuate. Barely made it out in time. They lost everything. House, belongings, all their memories. But in the midst of all that, something incredible happened. They had this huge outpouring of support from their community.
Like what specifically? What kind of support? I need to hear those good news stories, It helps.
Well, their neighbors jumped in right away, offering them a place to stay, clothes, food, whatever they needed. And John's fellow firefighters, they set up a donation fund to help them get back on their feet.
That's how it should be, right? People being selfless in a crisis. It gives you hope.
It really does. Sarah said she was overwhelmed by the kindness, even from strangers. People she'd never met were donating, sending toys for the kids.
That's so great. Even small acts of kindness, they make a difference. But what about the emotional side of things for this family? Losing everything must have been so traumatic.
It was. Sarah talked about the shock, the disbelief, just grieving for those first few days. But she also said how resilient her kids were. They adapted faster than she did almost.
Kids are amazing like that, aren't they? Find joy in the middle of anything almost.
Exactly. Sarah said watching them play, laugh, it reminded her that life goes on, even after a huge loss like that, gave her strength to keep going.
It's true, hope can come from unexpected places. What about John? Being away fighting fires while his own home's in danger? What was that like?
Incredibly hard, obviously. He felt guilty, helpless being away from his family in such a scary time. But he said knowing his fellow firefighters were there for them, it gave him some peace of mind.
You can see the bond between firefighters, can't you? Knowing they've got each other's backs no matter what.
For sure. And it shows how important community is, not just when disaster hits, but in preparing for it beforehand.
That's a good point. Especially with these wildfires getting more frequent, more intense, what can communities do to be more resilient, be ready for the next one?
Lots of things, both individually and as a group. Starts with having a plan, knowing evacuation routes, having an emergency kit ready, staying informed about fire risks where you live.
Yeah, the basics that everyone should do. But it goes beyond that, right?
Absolutely. Communities got to work together to create landscapes that are more resistant to fire. Clearing brush, creating defensible spaces around houses, even having smarter building codes.
So it's homeowners, policymakers, first responders, everyone working together.
You got it. And technology has a role to play too. We're seeing advancements in satellite imagery, AI, predictive modeling, stuff that helps us understand fire behavior better, use resources more effectively.
It's kind of wild using high-tech stuff to fight this ancient problem of fire, isn't it?
It shows what we can do. But it brings us back to the big picture. Climate change. We've mentioned it, but it's important to connect the dots here.
Right. Climate change is driving this increase in wildfires, not just in California, but worldwide. Hotter temperatures, worse droughts, dry forests. It's a recipe for disaster.
Exactly. So the question becomes, if we don't tackle climate change globally, are all our efforts to stop these fires just a temporary fix?
That's a tough one. I keep hearing that even small actions matter, though. Is there truth to that?
I think so. Every step we take to reduce our impact, even if it seems small, it adds up.
So individual actions count, But so does collective action, right? Like pushing for policies that focus on clean energy and sustainability.
100%. We got to hold our leaders accountable. Support the groups fighting climate change, make our voices heard.
We've come full circle, haven't we? Started with these California fires. Now we're talking global crisis. It shows how interconnected it all is. The solutions have to be multi-layered.
You got it. It shows why it's so important to stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. We can't let the size of the problem paralyze us. We have to believe change is possible.
Agreed. Concern has to become action, both individually and as a group. But, we haven't really talked about the money side of this, the financial burden these fires put on everyone.
Good point. We touched on price gouging for housing, but yeah, there are tons of other economic consequences.
Like what? Break it down for me.
Well, first off, just fighting these fires is ridiculously expensive. Hundreds of millions, sometimes billions of dollars.
Wow, I hadn't even thought of that. And that's just putting out the flames, right? Not the aftermath.
Right. Then you've got rebuilding infrastructure, helping displaced families, long-term health costs from the smoke. It all adds up fast.
Especially for California with its budget issues already.
It makes you wonder, how are we going to pay for all this? Higher taxes? Cuts in other areas? Not an easy problem.
Definitely complex. Are there any, innovative solutions people are looking at for the funding side?
There are some interesting ideas out there. Some experts are suggesting a national wildfire insurance fund, kind of like the flood insurance program.
Okay, how would that even work?
Basically, homeowners would pay into it, and then that money would be used to cover firefighting costs and rebuilding if there's a fire. Spread the risk, maybe lower insurance premiums.
Interesting. Wonder if it'll actually work. Any other out-of-the-box ideas?
Green bonds are getting some attention, using them to pay for wildfire prevention projects.
Green bonds. Sorry, not familiar with those.
They're basically investments specifically for projects that help the environment. So for wildfires, they could fund stuff like thinning out forests, controlled burns, community education to reduce fire risk.
So you get investors who want to support sustainability, fighting climate change, all that.
Exactly. It's gaining traction in the financial world. More investors are realizing that tackling climate change isn't just the right thing to do, it's also good business.
That's good to hear. Thinking long term, But are there any lessons we can take from other countries that are already doing a good job with wildfire risk?
That's what researchers are looking into. Places like Portugal and Australia have come up with some effective strategies we could learn from.
What are they doing differently? Give me some examples.
Portugal has a really community-focused approach to prevention. Lots of education for residents about fire risk, creating defensible spaces around homes, using controlled burns to get rid of fuel.
So it's proactive, thinking ahead, instead of just reacting once the fires start.
Spot on. And it's working for them. Shows what you can do with community involvement and education. People take charge of their own safety and their community's safety.
I like that. Changing the whole mindset from reacting to preventing. It's about giving people the tools and knowledge, right?
Right. So not just prevention either.
Yeah.
Portugal also has community-based firefighting. Locals are trained and ready to respond to fires in their own areas.
That's amazing. Not just relying on the pros. Citizens are part of the solution.
Totally. Everyone has a role. It creates a sense of shared responsibility, which you need for a problem this big.
Going back through all the sources we've looked at, this idea of building back better really stuck with me. It's not just fixing what's broken, it's using this crisis to create a better future,
Powerful idea. It
Mhm.
applies to everything we've talked about. Rebuilding homes, rethinking how we treat the environment, how we manage our forests.
Turning tragedy into opportunity, right?
Mm.
Learning from this and making a future that's stronger.
That's it. Moving past just reacting to crises. Thinking ahead. Seeing how individual actions, community stuff, global policies, it all fits together.
And that brings us back to you, the listener. What stuck with you from all this? What are you going to do about it? What conversations are you going to start? This deep dive's just the beginning. The real work starts now. We've really gone deep on this, haven't we? The fires themselves, the impact on people, the environment, the economy, even, the ethics of the whole prisoner firefighter program. And of course, that big elephant in the room, climate change.
It's a lot, for sure. And I think it just shows you there's no easy answer here. It's complicated, so the solutions have to be complicated too.
Yeah, no silver bullet. But even with all that, with the devastation and the tough questions, we did find some hope too, right? Communities coming together, new technologies, even just more awareness about climate change being this global problem that needs a global solution.
Exactly. It's like, even when things are this bad, you see how resilient people are. That drive to innovate, to help each other, It's not just about putting out these fires, it's about building a future where this doesn't keep happening, where we're ready.
So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What does that future look like? How do we actually get there?
Well, we've talked about some of it already, right? People making changes in their own lives to, lessen their impact, communities working together to make their areas more fire resistant, and of course those big policy changes, pushing for clean energy and all that.
But is it enough? Is that just putting a Band-Aid on a huge problem, or can we actually change things for the better?
It's easy to get overwhelmed, for sure,
Mm.
but I do believe we can make a difference. And a big part of that is realizing this isn't just a California thing. What happens here affects the whole planet in a way.
So are there other countries, other parts of the world that are doing things differently that we can learn from?
Absolutely. It's fascinating to see how different cultures approach this whole wildfire thing.
Hmm.
Take Australia, for example. They've put a ton of resources into technology, using drones, satellite imagery, all that, to track the fires and know where to send help.
So it's like using high-tech tools to, I don't know, outsmart the fire or at least understand it better.
That's a good way to put it. And their early warning systems are super advanced, giving people more time to evacuate, get prepared. That saves lives, saves property, and lets the firefighters work more strategically.
Sounds like a good system. What about other places? Any other examples that stand out?
Portugal has this really interesting model. It's all about community-based prevention.
Mm.
They really focus on educating people about the risks, how to make their homes and properties safer, and using controlled burns to reduce the amount of fuel the fire can feed on.
So it's more about stopping the fires from happening in the first place instead of just, reacting once they're already burning.
Exactly. And it's been really successful for them. Shows you what you can do when you get the whole community involved, when people understand the risks and how to manage them.
That's a powerful idea, shifting from reacting to preventing, empowering people, giving them the knowledge and the tools to protect themselves and their environment.
Yeah, it's about ownership. And it's not just about prevention either. Portugal also has this system where local people are trained to fight fires in their own communities. They're not just waiting for the pros to show up.
Wow, that's impressive. So it's like everyone's a firefighter in a way. That's got to create a real sense of, I don't know, unity and purpose.
It does. And it's that shared responsibility that's so important for dealing with a problem this big. We can't just leave it to the experts. We all have to be part of the solution.
Going back through all the research we did for this, the idea that stuck with me the most was building back better. It's not just about fixing what's broken. It's about using this crisis to create something better, stronger, more resilient.
I love that. And it applies to everything, right? How we rebuild houses, how we treat the environment, how we manage our forests. It's about using this moment to learn and make real changes.
Turning a tragedy into an opportunity. Not letting this all be for nothing. Making a future that's less vulnerable to these disasters.
That's what it's all about. It's a shift in thinking, moving away from just reacting to problems and being more proactive, and seeing how everything's connected, what we do as individuals, as communities, as a global society. It all matters.
And that brings us back to you, listening right now. After going through all this with us, what stands out to you? What are you going to do differently? What conversations are you going to have? This deep dive, this is just the start. The real work begins now, out there in the real world. Thanks for joining us, and until next time, keep asking those tough questions and keep searching for those solutions because they're out there. We've seen it.